Most riders assume a bike gets destroyed the way anything mechanical gets destroyed. A crash, a pothole, a bad crank. The truth is less dramatic and more common. Most bikes are ruined slowly, in a garage, by an owner who's doing something that feels like maintenance, or feels like nothing at all, but is quietly working against the bike every single time. None of these 10 habits require ignorance or laziness. Most of them are done by careful owners who simply never learned the specific reason a given habit causes damage. Here are 10 of those habits, counting down to the one that kills more frames and drivetrains over a normal lifespan than every crash on this list combined. Number 10. Pressure washing the whole bike at the gas station or with a garden hose on full blast. It looks like cleaning, and in a narrow sense it is. The frame comes out shiny. What it actually does is force water past the seals on the headset, the bottom bracket, and the hubs, seals that were only ever engineered to keep water out at low ambient pressure, not a direct jet. Once water gets behind a seal, it doesn't evaporate on its own. It sits against bare metal and starts oxidizing the bearing surface from the inside. The damage is invisible for months, right up until the bearing starts feeling gritty under load, by which point the pitting is already done. Number 9. Scrubbing the whole drivetrain, chain included, with dish soap or a citrus degreaser meant for engine parts. It cuts through grime fast, which is exactly the appeal and exactly the problem. Chain rollers and pivot points are packed with lubricant once, at the factory, in a way that's genuinely difficult to fully replicate at home, and a strong degreaser strips that internal lubrication out along with the dirt. A chain that comes out of that bath looking spotless and shiny is very often a chain that is now drier on the inside than it was before it got cleaned. Number 8. Storing the bike leaning against a wall by its front wheel, indoors, for months at a stretch through winter. It looks completely harmless. Nothing is moving. Nothing is under obvious stress. But sustained side load, applied to the same point on a fork and front triangle for weeks on end, slowly bends lighter aluminum and carbon frames in one direction, frames that were engineered to handle straight-line riding forces, not a permanent lateral lean. Most owners never connect a bike that rides slightly off-center years later back to the fact that it spent every night leaning the same way in a hallway. A wall-mounted hook or a simple floor stand removes the load entirely and costs less than a single new tire, which makes this one of the cheapest habits on the entire list to actually fix. Number 7. Letting brake pads wear straight down past the wear indicator line before doing anything about it. Cyclists usually notice when braking starts to feel weaker or the lever pulls closer to the bar. What they don't always register is the point where worn-out pad material runs out entirely and the metal backing plate starts grinding directly against the rim or rotor. That turns what would have been a $15 pad swap into a full rim or rotor replacement, sometimes both, because by the time the difference is obvious by feel, real structural material has already been machined away underneath the pad. Number 6. Running the chain in cross-chained gear combinations as a default. Largest front ring paired with the largest rear cog, or the smallest with the smallest. The bike still shifts, still moves, so most riders never think twice about it. But that extreme lateral chain angle grinds the chain, the cassette, and the chain rings against each other at a steeper wear rate than a straighter chain line ever would, and a rider who cross-chains constantly, out of habit rather than necessity, is often putting several thousand extra kilometers of wear onto a drivetrain that looks brand new. Number 5. Ignoring visibly fraying cables and cracked housing until shifting or braking stops working outright. Cables stretch and fray gradually over months, and the usual response is to wait for an actual symptom, a skipped shift, a mushy brake lever, before touching anything. By the time a cable snaps mid-ride, or worn housing has cut a visible groove into a frame's cable stop, a $5 cable and housing swap has often quietly become a damaged shifter, a scored frame, or both. It's worth noting how differently these 10 habits show up, depending on where a bike is stored and ridden. A bike kept outdoors in a humid climate accumulates the water-related damage, corroded bearings, rusted cables, far faster than the same bike kept in a dry garage, while a bike ridden hard on gravel or wet roads accumulates the wear-related damage, chains, cassettes, brake pads, faster than one used for occasional flat commuting. Almost nobody owns a bike that's equally exposed to every risk on this list, which is exactly why most owners are confident they're taking good care of their bike, while quietly neglecting the 1 or 2 habits that happen to matter most for their specific conditions. Number 4. Running tire pressure that's wrong in either direction and simply never checking it again after the first inflation. Too high, and every small road imperfection transmits straight through the tire into the rim, which over time cracks aluminum rims right at the spoke holes. Too low, and a hard hit on a pothole pinches the tube between tire and rim, a classic snakebite flat, or on a carbon rim, cracks the rim itself outright on the wrong impact. Most riders set pressure once, on day 1, and never touch a gauge again for a full year. Number 3. Torquing carbon components, seat posts, stems, handlebars, by feel and forearm strength instead of with a torque wrench and the manufacturer's spec. Carbon fails in a fundamentally different way than metal does. A steel or aluminum bolt that's slightly over-tightened just stays slightly over-tightened forever, with no consequence. A carbon part over-tightened by even a small margin can develop a stress fracture that is completely invisible from the outside, sitting there for weeks or months, until it fails completely and without warning, often mid-ride, at exactly the point that was over-tightened. A basic torque wrench costs less than a single carbon seat post, and using it correctly on every carbon bolt takes maybe 2 extra minutes during a normal fit adjustment, which makes skipping it one of the more avoidable risks on this entire list. Number 2. Skipping the annual service on sealed headset and bottom bracket bearings entirely, year after year. They're marketed as low maintenance by design, and most owners quietly hear that as no maintenance, ever. Water and fine grit still work their way past every seal slowly, over 1 or 2 full seasons of riding, and a headset or bottom bracket that's never once been reopened, cleaned, and repacked with fresh grease is very often corroding quietly on the inside for a year or more before it starts making any audible noise at all. Number 1. And the habit that ruins more bikes overall than everything else on this list combined, without a single dramatic moment attached to it. A chain that is never lubricated on any kind of actual schedule, just occasionally splashed with whatever's sitting in the garage once it starts audibly squeaking. A dry, worn chain doesn't fail quietly on its own. It accelerates wear on the cassette and chain rings at the same time, stretching as it wears. By the time an owner finally gets around to replacing a chain that's been neglected for a year or 2, they are very often replacing the cassette and chain rings along with it, 3 to 4 times the total cost of the maintenance that would have prevented all 3 failures at once. The reason this particular habit ranks above all 9 others isn't that a dry chain is somehow more dramatic than a cracked carbon bar or a corroded bottom bracket. It's that it's the single most universal habit on this entire list. Every rider, on every kind of bike, in every climate, has a chain, and it needs attention on a schedule measured in weeks, not seasons. The other 9 habits each affect a specific part or a specific kind of storage or riding. This one is the baseline that every single owner is either maintaining or quietly neglecting every single week they ride. It's worth adding that most of these 10 habits interact with each other, rather than happening in isolation. A rider who pressure washes the bike is also, almost by definition, someone who's washing it often enough that the water damage compounds over more cycles per season. A rider who never checks tire pressure is often also the rider who never checks brake pad wear, simply because neither one is part of any regular routine at all. The bikes that end up needing the most expensive repairs usually aren't victims of just one habit on this list. They're victims of 3 or 4 of them running at the same time, each one quietly making the others worse. To put a number on that last one, a mid-range chain typically costs somewhere in the $20 to $40 range. A cassette to match it runs $60 to well over $100, and chain rings add another $50 to $150 depending on the group set. Replace all 3 because a chain was allowed to wear unchecked for 2 seasons, and the bill for that single habit alone can run past $250 on a drivetrain that, checked and lubricated on a normal schedule, would have needed only the chain. None of these 10 habits look like neglect while they're actually happening. Every one of them looks like normal ownership, or at worst, a small shortcut nobody would think twice about. That's exactly why, added up across a normal bike's lifespan, they account for more ruined frames, wheels, and drivetrains than crashes, potholes, and manufacturing defects put together. A mechanic doing a proper annual service, chain check, bearing repack, cable inspection, torque check on anything carbon, can catch essentially all 10 of these before they become expensive, for a fraction of what any single failure ends up costing. If there's one habit worth adopting out of everything on this list, it isn't a specific fix for any single item. It's simply picking one fixed day each month to actually look the bike over, chain, brake pads, tire pressure, cable condition, torque on anything carbon, rather than waiting for something to feel wrong first. 9 of these 10 habits give some kind of early warning if anyone's actually looking for it. A squeak, a slightly duller sound, a slightly harder lever pull. The bikes that end up on this list aren't usually the ones ridden the hardest. They're the ones nobody looked at closely enough, often enough, to catch any of it in time. 30 minutes, once a month. Thanks for watching. If you want more honest looks at what's actually wearing out your bike, hit subscribe and stick around.